Hello. It was a Tuesday evening in Brookhaven, Missouri, the kind of town where life moved slower than the rest of the world, where the rusted grain silos leaned like old men and the diners still closed at 8. The sun was starting to fall, leaving behind smears of gold and soft gray across the sky. Jerome Ellis, a 27-year-old substitute teacher and part-time graphic designer, was on his way home from tutoring at the local community center. Jerome drove a dusty blue 2008 Honda Civic, dependable and paid off, a gift from his father when he graduated college. The car rattled when it hit bumps, and the AC only worked when it wanted to, but Jerome loved it. It represented every mile he'd put between himself and the narrow limits others had tried to draw around his life. He had just pulled out from the center's parking lot, his signal blinking, music low, windows down. His thoughts wandered to what he might cook for dinner. Maybe the leftover pasta. Maybe something fresh. He barely noticed the black and white patrol car as it eased into the road behind him. A mile down the road, the patrol lights blinked to life. Jerome's hands instinctively tightened on the wheel. He pulled over, heart rate rising as he powered off the music and rolled down his window. He rested both hands on the wheel in plain view, just like his father had taught him years ago. Be polite, be calm, but most of all, be careful, his father had warned. Doesn't matter what you did or didn't do. Some people only see your skin first. 2 officers stepped out. One approached the window, the other stayed behind, angled toward the rear of Jerome's car, hand resting near his holstered sidearm. "Evening," said the first officer. He was white, late 40s maybe, with a sun-reddened face and pale eyes that didn't smile. His badge read Officer D. Whitman. "Know why I pulled you over?" "No, sir," Jerome answered evenly. "Was I speeding? Didn't use your turn signal correctly. Switched lanes too quick." Whitman's eyes scanned Jerome's face, then dropped to the interior of the car. Jerome blinked. "I signaled when I turned out of the parking lot, and—" "License and registration," Whitman interrupted. Jerome nodded. "It's in my glove box, may I?" "Slowly," came the barked reply. He moved slowly, carefully. Whitman took the papers and stepped back. The second officer, younger, with a square jaw and buzzed haircut, came closer. His name tag said Officer Harris. "You from around here?" Harris asked. His tone was not curious. It was loaded, wary. "Yes, sir. Born and raised," Jerome replied. "You don't look familiar. You work nearby?" "I work at the middle school sometimes. Today I was volunteering at the center." Whitman returned, holding Jerome's license like it was something suspicious. "So what exactly do you do at that center?" Jerome felt the heat rise behind his collar. "Tutoring. Mostly math and science." Whitman chuckled without humor. "Lot of young men like you hanging around there these days." Jerome didn't take the bait. "You ever been arrested?" Harris asked suddenly. "No, sir." "Mind if we take a look inside the car?" Jerome hesitated. "Is there a reason, sir?" "Don't get smart," Whitman said, his voice hardening. "Just trying to do our job. We got reports of suspicious activity near the center this evening. You match a general description." Jerome's jaw tightened. "I've been tutoring since 4 p.m. You can call Mrs. Keller at the desk. She keeps the sign-in sheets." "Look," Whitman said, stepping closer. "We're giving you a chance to make this easy. Let us look, and we'll all be on our way." He knew his rights, but he also knew stories. Knew what happened when black men insisted on dignity in the face of power cloaked in a badge. He nodded. They opened the doors, rifled through the glove box, patted down under the seats, even opened the trunk. Jerome stood on the shoulder of the road, watching them paw through his belongings like it all might bite them. "Clean," Harris muttered. There was a trace of surprise in his voice. "You can go," Whitman said, tossing Jerome's license back toward the passenger seat. It fluttered to the floor. Jerome picked it up slowly, returned to the driver's seat, and closed the door. He didn't move immediately, just sat there, fingers trembling slightly on the wheel. As he pulled back onto the road, he didn't notice the unmarked car that had been parked across the street, half hidden behind a cluster of trees. Inside, someone had been watching, listening, and recording, because this wouldn't be the end of the story, only the beginning. The next morning in Brookhaven began as most did, slow and quiet. The church bells rang at 7 a.m. The bakery opened its doors, and the smell of coffee and sugar wafted into the chilled autumn air. But for Jerome Ellis, sleep had been elusive. His mind replayed the traffic stop over and over, each moment refracted through anger, then doubt, then a familiar, bitter resignation. He hadn't told anyone. Not yet. Not his father. Not his co-worker at the community center, and not the small circle of friends who met every Friday for dominoes and laughter that helped bury the week's weariness. Jerome had grown used to swallowing moments like this. That's what it meant to live with skin like his. But miles away, in a narrow room above the old barbershop, someone was reviewing the footage. Lucas Jennings was not from Brookhaven, not really. He had moved there 6 months prior after retiring from a short career as an investigative journalist turned public policy researcher. He came for the quiet, the cheap rent, and the small-town peace he told himself he wanted. But Lucas was the kind of man who, even in silence, listened for the sound of something breaking. He had installed the security camera in his upstairs window after someone keyed his car the second week he moved in. It wasn't fancy, just an old webcam hooked to a motion sensor, set to record whenever anything unusual passed within range. At 6:42 p.m. the night before, the feed had clicked on, catching the lights of a patrol car pulling behind a blue Honda Civic. Lucas watched now, coffee in hand, as the scene played out in grainy monochrome. No sound, but he didn't need it. The body language spoke volumes. The two officers, one aggressive, one watchful. The young black man, calm, composed, clearly complying. Then came the search. Lucas leaned closer, eyes narrowing. No resistance, no sign of danger, no cause. And then the final insult, the officer tossing the license dismissively back into the car like garbage. Lucas exhaled slowly. He reached for a notebook and scribbled down the timestamp. Something about the whole thing felt too calculated to be coincidence. He'd heard murmurs around town, stories passed along in quiet spaces, but they always came without proof. Until now. Jerome tried to forget. He buried himself in his work that day, printing flyers for the upcoming youth science fair at the center and helping Mrs. Keller sort donated books. When she commented on how tired he looked, he just smiled and blamed it on late-night grading. "Take care of yourself, Jerome," she said gently. "You do so much for these kids. Don't forget you matter too." He didn't respond right away, just nodded. That was the thing about small kindnesses. They landed hardest when the world around you felt sharp. Later that afternoon, as he packed up, his phone buzzed. Unknown number. Normally he ignored those, but something made him swipe to answer. "Mr. Ellis," came a voice, steady, professional. "My name is Lucas Jennings. I live a few blocks from the center. I believe we need to talk about what happened to you last night." Jerome froze. "I don't know what you mean." "There's a camera facing the intersection. I recorded your traffic stop." A long pause. "I don't know what you're after," Jerome said carefully. "But I'm not interested in making things worse." "I'm not a reporter anymore," Lucas replied. "I just think the truth matters. And I think Brookhaven's been hiding from it for a long time." Jerome hung up without another word. That night, Jerome sat on his porch, watching shadows move between streetlights. He remembered something his grandfather used to say. "A dog that's been kicked too long don't bark. It watches. It waits." Jerome had spent most of his life watching, waiting, trying not to rock the boat that he'd never been invited to steer. But now someone else had seen it. Someone who didn't look like him, who didn't have to care. And still he did. His phone buzzed again. This time a text. "I'm not trying to speak for you, but I won't pretend I didn't see what I saw. If you change your mind, I'll be at Charlie's Cafe tomorrow at 9. Jerome stared at the message. The screen dimmed and went black in his hand. Across town, in a dim room lit by a lone desk lamp, Officer Daniel Whitman sat with a beer in one hand and a half-eaten sandwich in the other. His patrol partner, Harris, paced near the window. "Think he'll make a stink about it?" Harris asked, voice low. Whitman shook his head. "They never do. Not around here. Not if they know what's good for them." Harris didn't respond. He looked young, but not naive. Still, he looked like he might. Educated. The quiet type. That's the kind that ends up on the news. Whitman scoffed. "News don't care about Brookhaven. And the brass'll back us like always. You saw the file they gave us at briefing. Said there were complaints coming from that center anyway. We're just following up." "You believe that?" Harris asked. "I don't need to believe it," Whitman replied. "I just need to keep this town the way it's always been." Outside, the wind picked up, rustling the leaves into whispered warnings. The past was beginning to stir, and Brookhaven would soon learn that silence can only bury truth for so long. The bells above Charlie's Cafe jingled softly as the doors swung open the next morning. Jerome stepped inside, wearing a black hoodie and a denim jacket, unassuming, quiet, still half hoping the man from the night before wouldn't be there. But Lucas Jennings was already seated at the corner table by the window, a coffee cup steaming in front of him, a weathered manila folder at his side. He looked up, nodded once. No smile, just acknowledgement. Jerome considered turning around. But something deeper, a pulse of curiosity, maybe a spark of something that felt like agency, held him still. He walked over. Lucas stood and offered a hand. Mr. Ellis. Jerome, he said, shaking it briefly. They sat. Lucas didn't start with pleasantries. He reached into the folder and pulled out a series of printed stills from the video, black and white frames, each one time-stamped, each one damning. This is from the stop, Lucas said, sliding them across. I've got the full video backed up. Clean. Unedited. Jerome stared at the images. There he was, standing on the side of the road with his arms crossed as the officers rifled through his trunk. In one, Officer Harris leaned inside the passenger door. In another, Whitman stood with his arms crossed, watching Jerome like a school principal waiting to punish a student who'd stepped out of line. Why are you showing me this? Jerome asked. Because I think people like Whitman do this all the time, Lucas said. And most of the time, no one notices. No one has evidence. But this time, we do. Jerome ran a hand over his face. Look, I've been through stops before. None of them pleasant. This one wasn't even the worst. I don't want to make a scene just to become a headline and still lose. Lucas leaned in. I understand. But I also found something else. About Whitman. He pulled out a document, an archived article from 2007. Local man hospitalized after altercation with police, officer cleared. Below the headline was a photograph of a young Whitman in uniform. The man next to him in the hospital bed was Joseph Parker, a father of 3, who had allegedly resisted questioning during a roadside incident. Parker had never fully recovered from the injuries. Jerome's eyes scanned the article. That was almost 20 years ago. Lucas nodded. 17. But there were others. Quiet cases. Settled. No official misconduct findings. But always the same pattern, young black men. Minor infractions. Resisted questioning. Matched a description. He paused. The Parker family still lives here. His daughter, Maya, teaches at the high school. Jerome looked out the window. The streets of Brookhaven stretched before him like they always had, neatly arranged, quietly segregated. You think this changes anything? He said quietly. I think it could, Lucas replied. If someone like you came forward. If it didn't just come from me. Jerome didn't answer. The silence stretched long enough to become uncomfortable. Then finally, let me think about it. Meanwhile, across town, Officer Harris stood at the vending machine in the police station, debating whether to get the stale chips or the older bag of pretzels. He didn't hear Captain Mather's approach. You've been quiet this week, the captain said. Harris turned, caught off guard. Just tired, sir. Something bothering you about that stop Tuesday? Harris hesitated. No, sir. Just routine patrol. Captain Mathers nodded, but there was a flicker of scrutiny in his eyes. You keep your reports clean, son, the captain said. You're still new, and Whitman. He's got a way of dragging people into things. Harris swallowed. Yes, sir. When the captain walked away, Harris stood still, hand hovering over the buttons. He remembered the way Jerome stood, the controlled stillness. Not defiant. Just tired. And then there was Whitman's smirk, the way he tossed the license like it didn't belong to a human being. He chose nothing from the vending machine and returned to his desk. On his screen was the start of his patrol log from Tuesday. His cursor blinked after the line. No contraband found. No incident report filed. He hovered there, then opened a new window. Search for Joseph Parker Brookhaven Police. What he read turned his stomach. Later that evening, Jerome sat with his father on the back porch, the sun casting long shadows over the dry grass. His father, Jerome Ellis, had been a firefighter once, Brookhaven's first black battalion chief before his retirement 5 years earlier. He had fought literal fires, but Jerome had grown up watching him fight quieter ones too, the ones at City Hall, at promotion boards, in whispered conversations that ended in disappointment. There's a man, Jerome began slowly, who saw what happened. He's got video, and some records from Whitman's past. Harold turned his head. He's showing this to the department? No. He's showing it to me. Wants me to speak out. Harold took a long breath. You want my blessing or my opinion? Jerome didn't answer. Son, Harold said, you already know what's right. But knowing and choosing are two different things. Jerome looked down at his hands. You ever think it's all just pointless? Nothing changes. Harold smiled sadly. Sometimes. But then I remember, names last longer than shadows. The folks who stepped up, even when it cost them, we still say their names. And the ones who didn't? They vanish. Jerome stared out at the horizon. Somewhere, something was shifting. The morning air was sharp with the promise of rain as Jerome stood outside the Brookhaven Public Library, his breath visible in the coolness. In his hands, he clutched a small flash drive and a folded statement he had rewritten 5 times the night before. He was here for the town's monthly Community Review Board meeting, a mostly performative gathering of local officials, police liaisons, and a smattering of concerned citizens who often nodded politely, then moved on. But this time, someone had asked to speak during the open floor. Inside the modest auditorium, rows of metal chairs were half-filled. Lucas sat near the back, inconspicuous. Captain Mathers leaned against a far wall, arms crossed, expression unreadable. Officer Harris was there too, seated alone, head slightly bowed. He hadn't told anyone he'd be attending. Jerome stepped up to the podium when his name was called. There was no microphone, just a small raised platform and a silence that spread wide. He unfolded the paper, cleared his throat, and began. Last Tuesday evening, I was pulled over by 2 Brookhaven police officers. I signaled. I followed every instruction. I didn't resist. I didn't speak out of turn. But I was still searched, interrogated, and humiliated on the side of a road for no reason other than suspicion that came from nothing I did, only what I looked like. A rustle swept the room. No interruptions. Just attention. Jerome continued. I know this isn't the first time, and I doubt I'm the only one. But this time, it was recorded. He held up the flash drive. From beginning to end. And that footage shows what far too many of us already know. Being black in this town means being guilty until proven innocent. From the back, Lucas watched the ripple of tension pass through the board members. One of them, a councilwoman in her 60s, shifted uncomfortably in her seat. I'm not asking for sympathy, Jerome said. I'm asking for accountability. He stepped down, handed the drive to the board clerk, and walked out without looking back. That night, Officer Harris sat in his apartment, the weight of silence pressing in. He opened his laptop. His cursor blinked on a blank incident form. After a long pause, he began typing. Not a report this time. A statement. I, Officer Ryan Harris, wish to report misconduct I witnessed on October 3rd during a traffic stop initiated by Officer Daniel Whitman. His fingers didn't hesitate, because sometimes, doing nothing is the loudest form of complicity. It took only 2 days for the story to ignite. At first, it was just murmurs, neighbors sharing a link, a local blog posting an article titled Brookhaven Man Shares Footage of Racial Profiling Incident. But by the end of the week, the video was circulating across regional news networks. The footage, grainy but undeniable, showed a compliant Jerome Ellis standing still while officers searched his car without consent. The license tossed like trash. The silence. The coldness. And then came the statement from Officer Harris. That, more than the footage, turned attention into outrage. In it, Harris described how Officer Whitman had initiated the stop with no probable cause, how he used pattern recognition language often reserved for targeting black residents under the guise of routine patrol. Harris admitted he hadn't spoken up in the moment out of fear, for his job, for retaliation, but that he could no longer remain silent. Within 48 hours, Brookhaven's mayor called a press conference. Standing in front of the city seal, flanked by tight-lipped officials, she delivered the town's first public reckoning in years. We cannot change what was done, she said, but we can confront it. We are placing Officer Whitman on unpaid administrative leave pending a full investigation. We will also review all stops conducted by this department over the past 18 months. She paused, then added something few expected. And we owe Mr. Ellis an apology. Jerome sat in the back of the press room, out of sight. He hadn't wanted to be there, but Lucas had urged him to witness it. When the camera stopped rolling, reporters flooded the sidewalk outside, but Jerome slipped through a side exit into the parking lot. The wind tugged at his jacket as he stepped into the gray afternoon. He didn't feel triumphant. Not really. Just relieved. And exhausted. Footsteps approached. It was Harris, his expression uncertain. I wanted to say thank you, Harris began, voice low. For standing up. You didn't have to. Jerome nodded slowly. Neither did you. There was a long pause. Then Harris added, I don't expect forgiveness. I just want to make sure this place doesn't keep doing what it's always done. Jerome looked at him for a long moment. Then don't stop speaking. They shook hands. A simple act, but in Brookhaven, it was a fracture in the pattern. Weeks passed. The investigation expanded. More residents came forward with stories, some recent, some long buried. People like Maya Parker, whose father had been hospitalized years ago in what was now widely seen as Whitman's first known abuse. She stood at the same podium Jerome had, her voice trembling but clear. They told us we were exaggerating, that we were looking for problems. But we weren't. We were just looking for truth. Community forums followed. New policies were proposed, mandatory body cams, third-party oversight, and a civilian advisory board. Brookhaven, for the first time in decades, was listening. On a quiet Saturday morning, Jerome returned to the community center. The kids were painting posters for the science fair, arguing over fonts and glitter glue. Mrs. Keller handed him a cup of coffee. "You all right?" she asked gently. "I think so," Jerome replied. "Still processing." She smiled. "You gave this town something it didn't know it needed." He looked around at the room filled with laughter and possibility. "Maybe," he said, "but I didn't do it alone." Outside, the sun broke through the clouds. And for the first time in a long time, Brookhaven looked different, not fixed, not perfect, but changed and still changing. Jerome Ellis, a man who had simply wanted to go home that night, had become part of something larger, a story that started with silence but ended with voices no longer willing to be ignored. And sometimes, that's how justice begins, not with a gavel or a grand speech, but with a turn signal blinking in the dark. It started with a turn signal. It could have ended in silence. But Jerome spoke. Lucas watched. Harris stepped forward. And a town that once looked away was forced to face the mirror. This wasn't just about one man, one stop, or one batch. It was about all the moments people said nothing, until one voice made it impossible to stay quiet. Cut to a shot of Jerome looking into the camera. Not angry, not afraid, just steady. Because truth doesn't need to shout, it just needs to be heard. What would you have done in Jerome's place? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Your voice matters. If this story made you think, hit that like button to help it reach someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe for more true stories that challenge comfort and change minds. One voice can change everything. Let's be louder together. Thanks for watching. Goodbye.